So it seems like a long time ago now, but just back in May we had our general election. Commonly expected was a left-wing Labour government, possibly with a Lib Dem coalition. Instead we have got a Tory majority, slim Tory majority, spun by the mainstream UK media as a landslide victory. In Scotland, the Labour Party were effectively wiped out, a traditional Labour stronghold, instead with the rise of the Scottish National Party on an anti-austerity platform. The day after the election, the Labour Party leader Ed Miliband stood down, with a competition announced to find a new party leader. The lack of a real left-wing candidate amongst the initial frontrunners prompted left-wing Labour MP Jeremy Corbyn to stand on an anti-austerity, anti-war, social democratic platform. And following huge support from Jeremy Corbyn amongst the radical left, campaign groups, prominent trade unions, Corbyn went from a rank outsider to a clear campaign favourite in the process, showing just how far New Labour had sort of strayed from the party's founding values. Since the announcement of the Labour leadership race, there's been about 200,000 new members join the Labour Party, and that's forced a reaction of sort of Blairites, New Labour types from the Labour Party to attempt to purge Labour of these new members who have signed up, pledging support, paying £3 to participate in the vote. So you've seen the Labour Party try to expel new members by claiming they had in the past campaigned against the Labour Party. Perhaps they had voted against Labour, and you've seen thousands of people prevented from voting in the election. The people that were rejected typically received an email saying, "We believe you do not share the Labour Party values," and have been prevented from voting. So what could have been a great sort of PR win for the Labour Party has effectively become a bit of a PR own goal. In spite of this, results from the Labour leadership race to be released this Saturday all typically show Jeremy Corbyn expected to win by a significant margin. So in summary, from next week, the UK may have a centre-left opposition party operating on a broadly similar anti-austerity platform to Syriza in Greece and Podemos in Spain. So thinking about our talk tonight, what lessons might social movements in the UK learn from the experiences in Greece of the spectacular rise and fall of Syriza? And what should we watch out for in the upcoming Spanish elections in December? Can we place our faith in the party political process and Jeremy Corbyn's ability to overcome internal division within his own party? Or are there lessons we should learn from Syriza? I'll hand over to you, Tia.
Although the project of Syriza obviously has crash landed, we have to see it in its wider context. And it has been a significant moment for the whole of the European left. The whole of the European left believe that in a country that is ravaged by a brutal neoliberal restructuring, there is the political expression of a whole nation to get out of this restructuring, and Syriza is a true expression of this will to stop austerity. Of course, the debt, as we understand, is only an excuse to bring about this neoliberal restructuring. It's happened before in many different countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Greece is probably the weakest link in the chain in Europe. That's why the capital chose Greece for the European restructuring for the first time. But it's not a phenomenon that is limited to Greece, so it's very, very misleading to speak of a Greek crisis. What is happening, in my opinion, is that capitalism is facing its own crisis. It's a crisis of profitability. It's a crisis of competition among capitalist powers which want to retain their levels of profitability, which means that they have to decrease wages, decrease the cost of social reproduction, like the welfare state, education, health, in order to be able to be competitive. At the same time, international capital has to create new opportunities for capital accumulation, for exploitation of the natural resources. That's what we see in this phenomenon that we previously saw only in Latin America, like open pit mines and massive privatizations for natural resources. So that's the attack of capital, and it's not a Greek phenomenon. Greek is only the start. This is a model that's going to be exported necessarily in the whole of Europe if European capital is to save itself from collapsing and from losing out to other capitalist powers. So, in this respect, the Syriza project was doomed to fail because they only had one tool, which was force of argument. But we're not talking about arguments here, we're talking about policies that are not decided at the state level, not even at the European level, but the dictates of international capital that has its own desires and priorities. So, Syriza has totally forgone its program of national salvation that announced last year in the fall. It cannot bring this through anymore. And it also disregarded the overwhelming rejection of austerity of the referendum just a few months ago, a 60% of rejection of austerity, and 1 week after that, a brutal memorandum of understanding with the creditors that dictates even harsher austerity. So why is Syriza still in power? We don't know yet. Because right now we have elections and we don't know what the political project of Syriza is anymore. Not even Syriza knows what the political project of Syriza is. But we could say that they are trying to advertise themselves as a better administrator of austerity. So austerity is inevitable. It's like a natural disaster that struck on Greece. So you need a decisive administrator who's going to diminish the effects of austerity of this natural disaster on the population. And this is, I think, the biggest mistake of the Syriza administration. It has convinced a whole nation that there is no alternative. So there is no way out of austerity. That's what Prime Minister Tsipras has been saying up until a few weeks. There is no alternative. So there is no alternative is not a left-wing message. I don't know who coined the phrase. I think it was this Iron Lady that was around this land. So right now, Syriza is rapidly devolving into a power of administrating of a really, really brutal system. And this idea of a popular expression of rejection of austerity that we saw in the face of Syriza has led to a romanticizing of the relationship of Syriza with the responses against austerity that we've seen in the past 5 years. So from the outside, you think that these are just two sides of the same struggle. You have the movements on the one hand providing alternatives, working on the grassroots, creating social change, and you have Syriza trying to take the power and implement these changes on the highest level. The reality from near is quite different. It has always been a marriage of convenience between Syriza and the movements. It came at a moment where the political system and satellites, parties, trade unions were totally delegitimized because they could not provide a response to people's suffering. So this was the moment when the movements found the space, the necessary space in the imaginary of the people, in the hearts of the people, to promote new alternatives from below. So we had a lot of experiments based on social self-initiative, on self-management, and on solidarity, on total new rules that did not pass necessarily from the capture of the state power or from the market-based solutions. Now, Syriza, these movements, unfortunately for me, they failed to create a political expression of this. And when I say political expression, I don't necessarily mean electoral expression. Okay, let's not be infatuated with the electoral process. You just need a political expression to bring together all these disparate experiments into a coherent voice. The coherent program of social change, of social salvation, if you like, in this case, which, since it was not there, Syriza stepped in. Syriza is not, let's say, new left in the same sense that Podemos is. Although I sense that Podemos is not, but we can find out later on. But Syriza is a party that comes from the split of the communist movement after the May of '68, out of Eurocommunism. So they're very, very state-oriented, state-heavy, although part of the Syriza has been involved in the social movements. However, it used the same instruments to influence the social movements, which was to build a hegemony, try to create structures of representation, and try to make all the activity of the movements fit into its program of wholesale state management. And this has been a huge problem for the movements because it was not about state management. It was about local structures of self-governance, of self-management of the local resources that did not pass through the state management. So this, after 2012, when Syriza started its hegemony in the social movements, they started to become marginalized. Gradually, the movements started becoming demobilized. And this has proven fatal, because after 2 years nearly of demobilization, we have got a situation far worse than what it was when the wave of mobilization started in 2010. So you have two conceptions of politics here. One is politics as the art of the possible. I think it was Bismarck who coined this, as the art of bringing about change that could be implemented within these institutions with a pragmatic sense. And this was the project of Syriza. And you have another conception that is politics as an exercise in radical imagination, brought forward by the social movements who found this space of action within a society that was stricken by crisis. Of course, this desire for internationalization was not endemic to the Greek context, and you can see in Spain as well how they wanted to storm the institutions about the same time, and many international intellectuals who backed the Occupy movement or backed the Squares movement, they, after the hangover of the Occupy movement, they promoted some kind of alliance between left-wing parties and movements. And this alliance comes through this idea that there is the constituent power on the grassroots that brings forth new institutions, creates new solutions, and then there is the constituted power of the state that has to be taken over and turn these solutions into permanent institutions. So we're talking about the conquest of state power. But can you really conquer state power? This is a question that the left wing has not been asking itself enough, I think. To start with, by conquering the government, you're just conquering a tiny bit of real power. So there are huge parts of power that are outside government control. So you have, for example, the armed forces, which in Greece happen to be penetrated by extreme right elements. You have the entrenched bureaucracy, which acts despite the government. Of course, you have the powerful influence of the mass media that are controlled by the oligarchy, are controlled by these people who in Greece have the money and have the real power. So imagining that you are capturing power is maybe an illusion. Of course, many people within the left acknowledge this, but their idea of how to overcome this is mobilizing society, but mobilizing it as an accessory to governmental power. So for them, it was great that people gathered in the squares to protest austerity during the negotiations. So this was helping the government improve its negotiating position. But this is nothing like a real popular democracy from below, nothing like the people taking matters in their own hands. This is not a conception of popular power. So I could mention a host of broken promises and lost opportunities of Syriza in these 7 months that has been governing the country. I don't want to go too far into this, but let me just say that Syriza was involved in many social movements as a very central part. When it came to power, it failed to fulfill, just turned against these very social movements that was hegemonizing before. We're talking about a very awkward situation. For example, the public broadcaster was shut down by the previous government, okay? And there was a huge wave of people who wanted to reinstate ERT. Also, the workers took over the building of the public broadcaster and kept broadcasting in a self-managed way during 2 years. So they made a blueprint of a new kind of broadcasting that was open to society. So society, through the assemblies, was involved in the creation of the program. There was no hierarchies. It was all the decisions were taken by the technicians and the journalists alike. So here you are, you have a model on how to improve society through social self-initiative. What Syriza does is he reinstates the previous model of television. So we're talking about a statist model of television, corporatized. Okay, so it's run like a private company and with a rigid control from above. And now, one by one, the people who supported all this self-management, their shows are being cancelled, they are being fired from the public broadcaster. Also, I can give you more examples, like the water movement in my town. We had a huge mobilization against water privatization in my town. We even created a scheme, a model for bringing the water company under citizens' control, and we tried to push this forward. In any case, we managed to freeze the privatization. Syriza wanted always a hegemonic part within the movement. So they said, okay, no, scrap this model of social control. What we'll do is we'll get to power, reinstate state control, problem solved. Syriza comes to power, it signs a memorandum. Now, a big part of the shares of the company are up for grabs again by the same people who were part of the anti-privatization movement just until a few months before. I could go on, but I only have 5 minutes left, so I don't want to get into too much detail, but we'll get the drift. I would like to talk about this perception of this project of Syriza. What is it really? So we have the only place where Syriza excels is the issue of individual human rights, which is great. It's very important to get, for example, citizenship rights for second-generation immigrants, civil union rights for same-sex couples, repeal anti-repressive laws. There are huge struggles behind this, and it's good that it's happening. But it's really, really weird that a left-wing government limits itself to a field that is not the field of left-wing government, it's the field of liberalism, traditionally. So the project of Syriza, and to a great extent the project of the European left, and this is a criticism to maybe even the Labour, new conception of Labour that Jeremy Corbyn wants to bring about, is a modernization on one hand, but a nostalgia on the other hand. Nostalgia for the golden age of capitalism, when the state was powerful and could mediate the social conflict, the class conflict, could be a guarantee of reproduction of society through the welfare state. So these years where capitalism could redistribute its surpluses, create a middle class that was well off, that would in turn support capitalism be its pillar. This is the model that the whole of the European left wants to go back to, and to a great extent this is the yardstick by which they judge the social change and progressive politics in Europe. There is a problem. These years are never coming back, because these years were not a choice of a social democratic party, they were not made out of charity. The transformation and the creation of the social state, the transformation of capitalism after the Second World War was just a necessary transformation of capitalism in order to survive, to save itself from the red threat, and to be able to establish itself. This is not coming back because it's not compatible with the kind of transformation that capitalism needs right now to get it out of its major crisis, namely the crisis of profitability and crisis of overaccumulation. So what is to be done? We have two conceptions out of the recent struggles in the whole of Europe, and in Greece especially, but the rest of the Europe, there is a contradiction even within Occupy, within Kinthe, ME, within all the grassroots movements. It's two competing perceptions of the state. So the state, according to one perception, is the last bastion of power available to the common man. So this is as far as social control can go. It's very feeble, really, because representative democracy is not working as well as it should be. But these people say that this is the only way to control the immense social power of capital. After the state, it's just capitalism in its raw and naked form, controlling the society directly without external oppression. Then there is the other conception that the state, even in its more benign forms, it's usurping society of its capacity to govern itself. So it's an external structure that does not allow people to cater for their own matters. I think we should overcome both these perceptions. This second perception says, for example, the anarchists say, okay, let's smash the state and the benign, the good human nature will come about and everything will be great. I think this is very wrong. The state cannot be smashed. It's not a thing that you can smash, it's a set of social relationships that takes a long time to unlearn. But also we have another perception that says, let's just build in the cracks of the state. Let's build our projects, through self-organization, self-initiative society. Eventually we're gonna destroy the structures of domination. I think this is problematic as well. We should also go beyond it. As much as we should go beyond the idea that we can somehow capture the state. In all cases in the 20th century, the state has captured parties and movements, never the other direction. I don't see why this is going to happen now. So, if we are to have any meaningful social change, I think we have to address this idea of power. It's a sine qua non condition that society remains mobilized. But at the same time, we need to address the issue of political organizing and subverting, penetrating, infiltrating, confronting the current institutions. I'm not here to bring the solution, but there are many ideas. For example, an idea that is now coming to the forefront is the idea of libertarian municipalism. Actually, we have Dimitri Rousopoulos here, who is the founder of the Transnational Institute of Social Ecology. So the ideas of Mari Booksin are coming back, and you have seen this in Rojava, in Kurdistan. We have some kind of municipalism. Of course, it's not the same as libertarian municipalism applied in Spain, which is a far more, let's say, hopeful conception about power than trying to get the state for me. Of course, there is always a danger of the party become from an instrument of the movement in order to address the issue of power. It becomes the organizational and discursive center point. So from trying to change the world around us and create new structures, we change our discourse, we change our language into the issue of state administration, electoral politics, which is the beginning of the end, I think, for social movements that want to change the world. Now, the ordeal of the Greek left and the movements can show us, we can extract many useful conclusions about what should be the relationship of movements and power. The short thing is that the divorce of movements and the left in Greece is permanent. We're still waiting to see what this next stage will bring about. Thank you.